Because if Drake is really the untouchable giant his fan base keeps describing, then somebody needs to explain why an alleged chart projection tied to Iceman had him doing around 44,000 total units, while only about 80 of those were pure sales. At the exact same moment, Joe Budden was on mic saying no real MC is scared of that pen anymore. That is not one bad headline. That is 3 alarms going off at once. You have the numbers alarm, the aura alarm, and the fan base alarm. Because while Captain Tough Talk was hinting on stream that the pen isn't dry, a completely different corner of the internet was spiraling so hard over Jay-Z and Kendrick Lamar that the whole thing started looking less like confidence and more like panic with Wi-Fi. And that is the part a lot of people are missing. This is not just about whether Drake can still rap. Of course he can rap. The real disruption is that the machine can still make him look huge while the culture is starting to treat the mystique like expired milk. Personal stakes, his credibility. Cultural stakes, what hip-hop counts as dominance after Kendrick. Systemic stakes, what streaming numbers are actually telling you versus what fans want them to mean. And later, when we get to why the 80 pure copies story hit people so hard, even before anybody fully verified every screenshot, the entire picture gets a lot uglier. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like and subscribe. Let's get into it. So here's the situation as it stands. Drake has spent the post-battle era trying to do 2 things at once: keep the commercial train moving and rebuild the intimidation factor that took a major hit after the Kendrick Lamar clash. That is why every little bar, every stream moment, every side comment now gets examined under a microscope. When he recently popped out and delivered that "careful with that reply because the pen isn't dry" energy, he was not just tossing out a slick line. He was trying to remind the room that he still has the ability to make examples out of people. That is the message. That is the branding. The problem is the room did not react like it was 2018 anymore. Then you had this allegedly circulating chart projection, widely reposted by rap pages and fan accounts, claiming Iceman was still doing respectable overall activity while only moving around 80 pure copies for the week. Now, if that report is accurate, that ratio is what sets social media on fire, because pure sales are not about passive background plays. They are about somebody opening a wallet, hitting buy, and choosing to directly support the release. So when an artist whose entire online army loves flexing numbers suddenly gets attached to a tiny pure sales figure, even if the streaming total still looks solid, it hits like a reputation bruise. And now Joe Budden enters the picture. Joe didn't argue that Drake forgot how to rap. That would be lazy. What Joe pushed was more dangerous, the idea that the fear factor is gone. In other words, people may still respect the skill, but they no longer hear "pen isn't dry" and think, "Oh no, nobody better move." They hear it and think, "Who exactly are you talking to?" That is a brutal shift, because once the aura goes, every flex starts sounding a little more performative. Add in the fan crash-outs, the Jay-Z discourse, the constant moving of the goalposts from pure sales to streaming to lawsuits to conspiracies, and this stops being a small rap conversation. This becomes a referendum on what Drake actually still controls: the charts, the culture, or just the noise. And the question hanging over all of it is simple. Is this a temporary embarrassment, or are we watching the public discover that the image was much stronger than the actual belief behind it? Let's start with the most visible piece of evidence, because this is where the entire conversation detonated. A chart screenshot began making the rounds on rap pages, fan accounts, and repost hubs, allegedly sourced from Hits Daily Double, showing Drake's Iceman line sitting on respectable total consumption, while pure sales were way down around 80 copies for the week. Now, I want to be careful here. Unless we are looking at a directly confirmed final report, that kind of screenshot should always be treated as reported, not gospel. But even as a reported figure, it caused chaos for a reason. People understand what a low pure sales number means symbolically. It means massive passive reach is not necessarily turning into active support. And yes, before the stands jump up screaming, pure sales are not the whole story of music in 2026. Everybody knows streaming dominates, but that is exactly why the ratio matters. If somebody is pulling tens of thousands of units overall, yet allegedly only getting around 80 direct purchases, then what the public is seeing is a giant gap between visibility and conviction. Does everybody understand how crazy that gap looks for a superstar whose supporters constantly weaponize stats? You can't spend years telling people numbers are the ultimate scoreboard and then suddenly act like one category doesn't matter when that category gets embarrassing. The second surface-level piece is Drake's own mouth. On stream, he gave that line about how people should be careful with the reply because the pen isn't dry. That sounds cool on paper. It sounds like a warning. It sounds like the old "don't make me do this" Drake. But timing is everything, and Mr. Pen Not Dry chose to throw that energy into the world after the biggest public lyrical loss of his career had already reset the atmosphere around him. So instead of the line landing like a threat, it landed for a lot of people like costume jewelry, shiny from far away, hollow close up. That is the identity disruption right there. A few years ago, fans would have clipped that line and spammed it like a bat signal. This time, a huge chunk of the conversation turned into jokes, side eyes, and to-who reactions. Why? Because the statement didn't come with a target, didn't come with momentum, and didn't come with the kind of fear Joe Budden was talking about. It came with baggage. It came with Kendrick. It came with the lawsuit era. It came with people already questioning whether the machine around Drake is stronger than the menace inside the bars. Same sentence, different context, completely different effect.
Now, the third piece of surface evidence is the ugliest one, and it's the one people need to stop brushing off as just internet stuff. A viral clip and related posts circulated showing a man allegedly pushing hostile anti-Jay-Z messaging in public, while online spaces tied his energy to Drake stan paranoia and rap media conspiracy talk. I'm not claiming that person had any real connection to Drake, academics, or anybody important, because that has not been proven, but that's the point. He didn't need a real connection. The climate itself was enough. When a fan culture gets so worked up that every loss has to become a secret war, every critique has to become betrayal, and every elder statesman has to become the enemy, you are not looking at confidence, you are looking at destabilization. And this is where some of you need to be honest. Stable fan bases celebrate. Unstable fan bases scramble for explanations. Stable fan bases buy the album, enjoy the win, and go outside. Unstable fan bases start throwing around conspiracies, pretending metrics don't count anymore, and acting like any criticism is a plot by Rock Nation, UMG, Spotify, aliens, whoever. That is why the 80 Pure story hit so hard. It didn't just produce debate, it produced defense mechanisms. There's also a simple practical point here that no amount of spinning can erase. Billboard-style pure sales include digital album purchases, so even without physical copies, an audience that wants to send a message can still go support directly on major storefronts. That is why people kept focusing on the number, not because pure sales are the only metric, but because they remain the cleanest "I chose this" metric. And when that number allegedly collapses for an artist who is always presented as the center of the universe, people naturally start asking what the streams are really reflecting. Fandom, habit, playlisting, autoplay, or all of the above. So, surface level, the picture already looks rough. You have a reported sales ratio that feels absurd for the size of the star. You have a public tough talk moment that got mocked more than feared. And you have fan behavior that looks less like victory laps and more like emergency spin. But numbers and clips are only phase one. Once the people inside rap spaces start saying the quiet part out loud, that's when this gets much worse. And oh, do I have more for you, because the stands are really not going to like this one. The chart screenshot was embarrassing enough, but when the reaction shifts from random commenters to people who actually live inside hip-hop conversation every week, that is when the mask starts slipping. And the next piece is the killer. Joe Budden did not say Drake can't rap. He said the threat don't hit the same anymore. And the difference between those two statements is exactly why this story matters. So before anybody starts screaming hate, just wait until we get to how the room around Joe reacted, how Megaphone Act tried to frame it, and why even Drake's defenders keep proving the point without realizing it. Joe Budden's take is the first big cultural evidence piece because it landed exactly where it was supposed to land, on the aura, not the technical skill. On his platform, Joe basically argued that no actual MC is hearing Drake's pen isn't dry talk and trembling the way they maybe would have at one time. That is not a statement about syllables. That is a statement about social power. And what made the moment stronger is that the conversation around him turned into a debate over whether Drake can still get busy versus whether anybody is scared. Those are not the same thing, and Joe understood that. That distinction matters more than people think. There are plenty of artists who can still rap very well, but no longer command fear. Joe's analogy in the broader room's pushback basically framed Drake as a guy who can still throw punches, but no longer walks into the cafeteria and clears it by reputation alone. That is brutal imagery for a rapper who built so much of the last decade on feeling inevitable. And if you watch the clip, you could see the tension. Some people wanted to defend the skill. Joe kept steering the point back to intimidation. That tells you the cultural conversation has shifted. Drake's fans are arguing resume. Critics are arguing belief. The second cultural evidence piece is the reaction ecosystem around fan pages, X spaces, and rap discourse hubs. The pure sales debate instantly triggered the exact same move you always see when a protected narrative starts cracking. Move the goalposts. Suddenly, the crowd that spent years making every chart update sound like scripture wants you to believe streaming is the only real metric. Suddenly, the same people who call Kendrick fans broke want to pretend direct purchases are obsolete. Suddenly, all context matters only when it saves Captain Tough Talk from looking bad. Come on now, y'all see the game. And yes, there is a counter-argument here. The fair pushback is that in the streaming era, many superstars sell relatively low, pure numbers compared to older eras, especially if there are no physical bundles or deluxe collector packages floating around. That is true, I'm not denying that. But that nuance does not rescue a reported number like 80 if it's accurate, because we are not talking about some mid-tier act with a casual audience. We are talking about one of the biggest rap stars ever, with one of the loudest and most hyper-online fan bases in music. If even a tiny fraction of that machine decided to prove a point through direct purchases, the figure should not look that microscopic. That is why the story kept spreading. The third cultural evidence piece is the silence and positioning from the other side. Kendrick Lamar has not needed to constantly relitigate the battle in public. Jay-Z has not needed to roll around in the mud with every fan theory. That calm is its own kind of cultural evidence. It creates contrast. One side appears to be letting the result breathe, while the other keeps trying to remind everybody the pen still exists.
Hip-hop. Repeated reminders usually mean one thing. The room stopped assuming it on its own. Then you bring in Megaphone Act, or at least the broader media spokesman lane he represents, and the pattern gets even funnier. The framing becomes, why do people who claim to dislike Drake keep reporting on Drake? That spin is cute, but it dodges the actual issue. The reason people keep talking about Drake is because he is still one of the biggest artists in rap, and because his every move now doubles as evidence in the culture's post-beef audit. That is not obsession, that is consequence. When you spent years at the top and then took a public L of that size, the aftershocks become the story. And some of y'all need to catch the hidden comedy here. The loudest defenders keep accidentally confirming Joe's point. If the line about the pen not being dry was still naturally intimidating, why does it need 24-hour protection services on social media? Why does every criticism require a 5-part thread, a conspiracy board, and a sermon from the digital deacons? Real fear does not need this much customer support. That is also why the "nobody's scared anymore" line spread so quickly. Not because everyone suddenly thinks Drake is trash. Most people do not think that. The more honest read is harsher. They think he is still talented, still successful, still capable of making hits, but no longer culturally unquestioned. And once that happens, every bar gets graded harder. Every boast gets measured against reality, and every sales flex comes with an asterisk if the support underneath it looks passive instead of active. So after the cultural layer, the pattern is clear. Public evidence looked shaky, insider conversation looked worse, fan spin looked desperate. And now we have to do the part basic reaction channels avoid, because the real story is not just Drake, Joe, or a bad-looking screenshot. The real story is the system that taught people to confuse omnipresence with invincibility. Because pause for a second. This is where the conversation has to leave pure gossip and enter the business. The first systemic angle is the difference between consumption and commitment. Streaming numbers can reflect genuine love, sure, but they can also reflect programming, passive listening, autoplay, playlist placement, catalog inertia, gym playlists, background plays, and fan-organized streaming marathons. A stream is useful data. It is not sacred data. A purchase, by contrast, is far closer to a direct vote. That is why the alleged 80 pure copies figure felt catastrophic as symbolism, even to people who know streaming is the dominant model. Think about what that means in practice. An artist can remain enormous inside the ecosystem, while the intensity of direct consumer support quietly weakens. If the release is still being pushed across DSPs, talked about by all the big rap accounts, and surrounded by constant discourse, the overall unit line may continue to look healthy, but the pure sales line can reveal something more intimate. How many people felt motivated enough that week to intentionally go get it? That is not an old head metric. That is a commitment metric. And for a rapper whose brand has always leaned on dominance, any sign of a commitment drop becomes a culture story instantly. Now layer in the second systemic angle, narrative management. Drake's era of superstardom has overlapped with the most manipulated, engineered, and hyper-amplified media environment rap has ever had. I'm not saying his success is fake. That would be stupid. The man has real hits, real talent, real catalog power. What I am saying is that the modern machine can magnify an artist's inevitability to the point where people start treating market share like moral authority. Playlist support, algorithmic familiarity, influencer repetition, gossip account framing, clip culture, live stream side missions, meme recirculation, all of that can create the sensation that an artist is larger than criticism itself. And then something like the Kendrick battle happens, followed by legal drama, and the whole illusion gets stress-tested. Drake's legal actions and petitions around the promotion of Not Like Us, including the widely reported complaints involving UMG, radio, and DSP ecosystem behavior, mattered for more than the headlines. They told the public that the machine is not some fan fantasy. The biggest players in music absolutely believe platform relationships, promotional pressure, and amplification mechanisms can shape outcomes. Once that door is open, you cannot easily close it again. You can't ask people to think the system matters when you lose, but not when your own numbers raise questions. That is the part the stands hate most. Mr. Pen Not Dry helped normalize the exact conversation that now hurts him. When you put the industry's invisible hands on trial, people start looking at every chart line, every playlist pop, every suspiciously durable talking point, and every media surrogate with different eyes. They start asking, is this demand or is this distribution? Is this loyalty or is this omnipresence? Is this a fan base carrying the artist or is it an ecosystem carrying the perception of the artist? And let's take it one step further. The reason Joe Budden's "Nobody's Scared" comment hit so hard is because aura in rap has always been a hybrid product. It's never only bars. It's bars plus timing, plus public momentum, plus the sense that if you challenge this person, they can hurt you culturally. For years, Drake had that. He had the hits, the reach, the platform gravity, the line-making ability, the social advantage, the label infrastructure, and the online propaganda all moving in the same direction. That combination created fear. But once a major loss breaks the spell, the machine can preserve size without restoring terror. Big difference. So what I think is happening here is simple.
We are watching the split between Drake the consumption giant and Drake the unquestioned rap boogeyman become visible to the average fan. Those used to feel like the same person. They are not the same person
anymore. One can still put up streams. The other needs belief. And belief is what looked weak in that pure sales report, weak in the reaction to the stream warning, weak in the crash-out fan behavior, and weak in Joe's broader point. That is why this story is bigger than 1 week's projection. It exposes how the industry can keep an artist commercially loud while the culture starts emotionally downgrading the myth attached to him. And once that split is visible, every future release becomes a test, not just a drop. Now here's the truth bomb. And this is the piece that ties every thread together. The real problem for Drake is not that he allegedly sold 80 pure copies in a week. The real problem is that millions of people found that number believable. Sit with that. The damage is not only in the figure, the damage is in the trust collapse around the brand. If the audience still fully believed in the old version of Drake, they would reject that report on instinct. Instead, a huge section of the internet looked at it and said, honestly, that tracks. That is devastating, because belief is the most valuable currency a superstar has, more valuable than 1 week on a chart, more valuable than one viral clip. Belief is what makes a boast sound like prophecy instead of performance. Belief is what makes a diss threat feel dangerous instead of theatrical. Belief is what keeps a fan base relaxed instead of forcing them into round-the-clock spin control. And right now, belief around Captain Tough Talk is leaking from multiple holes at once. Joe Budden's point confirms the cultural side of it. The fan meltdowns confirm the emotional side of it. The alleged sales ratio confirms the consumer side of it. And the industry context confirms the systemic side of it. All roads lead to the same ugly conclusion. Drake can still command attention, but attention is no longer automatically converting into trust, fear, or active defense. That is a catastrophic downgrade for somebody whose whole public mythology was built on unavoidable greatness. And this is why the make your hits and keep it moving advice actually sounds smarter than the tough talk. Because every time Mr. Pen Not Dry tries to force the old aura back into the room, he risks reminding people that the room no longer reacts the same way. That is how legends accidentally become self-parodies, not because they lose talent, but because they keep speaking from a throne the audience has already mentally resized. To me, that is the major reveal. Not Drake is finished. That's lazy and probably false. The reveal is worse because it's more realistic. The commercial empire can survive while the rap invincibility myth keeps shrinking in public. And once those two things separate, every boast starts sounding like customer retention. That is also why the right people still look strongest in this story. Kendrick Lamar did not need a daily press run to make the results stick. He did the job, left the evidence in the music, and let time turn the win into atmosphere. That discipline matters. Jay-Z did not need to wrestle with conspiracy-stained fan theatrics to preserve his standing. He just remained Jay-Z. And Joe, for all his messiness, played the reluctant truth-teller role here by saying the part plenty of people were already thinking but were scared to phrase correctly. Go back to the two biggest moments in this video. First, that alleged pure sales figure. Whether it gets adjusted later or not, it exploded because it matched the feeling of a brand living on scale more than devotion. Second, that pen isn't dry line. A statement designed to project danger ended up generating debate about whether anybody is even supposed to be scared anymore. Those are not random moments. They are mirror images. One shows the consumer gap. The other shows the aura gap. And that is why I keep saying the culture is course-correcting in real time. The right person is still winning because the guy who handled his business most completely no longer has to shout about it. One side needed constant reminders. The other side left a memory too big to argue with. That's the whole game. Now, does this mean Drake can never have another monster moment? Of course not. He's too big, too skilled, too plugged into the system for that kind of silly absolutism. But it does mean the standards changed. The room is no longer handing him intimidation on credit. He has to earn it again, if that is even possible.
And until then, every weird sales ratio, every over-talking stream moment, and every fan crash out is just more proof that the old myth is under reconstruction. So yes, there is actually a controlled optimism here for hip-hop. When the noise settles, integrity, timing, and execution still matter. The machine can amplify. It cannot force the culture to believe forever. And this is only the start, because there are at least 3 things to watch next. First, whether any official or more complete sales reporting changes the 80 Pure story or confirms the broader picture people already reacted to. Second, whether Drake keeps poking at the field with vague pen talk or finally takes the smarter route and leans fully back into records instead of reminders. And third, whether the industry side of this gets even messier as people keep revisiting how labels, streamers, media personalities, and fan armies all help manufacture momentum. So if you've been watching this whole saga with one eyebrow raised like I have, make sure you're locked in here, because every new chart, every new sub, and every new lawsuit wrinkle is feeding the same larger story. And trust me, the next video you need to watch is the one on why Drake's own war with the machine may have permanently changed how fans read every one of his numbers. That topic has a much darker center than people realize, because once a superstar teaches the public where the levers are, every future victory starts looking like it came with fingerprints. That one is going to be wild.